for just reducing the trade deficit. In other words, just settle for them buying more stuff, but not really push for the structural changes. Today he said several times that he wanted everything resolved. And what I've been told is that he used to have an obsession with the trade deficit, but over time he's come to understand why these structural issues are really important. And those are hard ones to resolve and verify, but it sounds like that's what they're pushing for.
Tom, there are experts here in this town as well as finance experts in New York who are skeptical about dealing with China on this level, and that they could just pat his back and kind of say, here's something for now, and continue their practices down the road. But the president has managed to get them to this point.
Yeah, and I think he'll get the agricultural stuff. We will get a deal. I'm 95% certain of that, because the Chinese need a deal. Their economic downturn debilitates President Xi's ability to reform the economy and do the other things in geopolitics he wants to. And President Trump wants a strong economy and consolidation of the market. So we will get something. I think President Trump will also get, in terms of machinery access, in terms of selling medium value goods, those American companies, Caterpillar type companies, for example. What he won't get is the intellectual property protection, because President Xi cannot give him that. The Chinese will commit to that, and they'll gradually break it down and keep stealing it, because they need to do that to do what their ultimate ambition is, which is to usurp the United States as the guarantor of the international economic order.
I thought you were going to say take over the world, but you were heading down that road.
Broadly.
Something like that.
It's something like that. Okay, Molly.
It is interesting to reflect on where we were when we started this trade war. We were told this would be disastrous for the United States and that China would handle it just fine. And it turns out that the U.S. actually imposed tariffs pretty smartly. This has hurt China far more than it has hurt the U.S., which is having to absorb short-term costs in hopes of a long-term deal. China had a very foolish approach to it. They decided to target their tariffs in Democratic districts, or in districts that they thought might be able to turn Democratic in the 2018 midterms. It was a very short-sighted strategy on their part. They're the ones suffering, and that meddling in U.S. elections is not looked kindly upon by everybody, as well, as we heard in the Intel briefing earlier this week. But this whole thing was brought up not just about the trade deficit, but really to deal with those decades-long problems, the way the Chinese dump and steal intellectual property. And so I think people will be eager to see major gains made on all of these fronts.
Are there people, do you think, on either side of the aisle who are second-guessing their criticism of this president going in on how he was handling the China talks?
Well, I think they might do that if he gets a deal. I think it's a little early. I mean, you don't think that the Chinese are going to give up on those structural issues, but that is the top priority for Bob Lighthizer, and supposedly now for the president.
But to the president's defense, though, in terms of, it's the best deal we can get, because they won't give that up. But what we are doing, the administration very effectively, limiting Huawei's access to both our allied markets, shutting them down, just closing doors on them. And that's how you deal with it, and you hit them with the cyber stuff as well. Right. So, if you have those two dual approach, that's pretty good.
I want to talk quickly about Venezuela. Here's the Secretary of State, the now disputed President Maduro, and the opposition leader. Guaido.
The United States is prepared to support the Venezuelan people to achieve the freedom, democracy. This is a catastrophe, a man-made catastrophe by the Maduro regime.
This campaign has been prepared to justify a coup d'etat in Venezuela that has been set, financed, and actively supported by the Donald Trump administration. If the government of the United States intends to intervene, they will have a much worse Vietnam than you could imagine.
The pressure and the support of the United States is important, and all the other countries in the world that support us, we are sure that we are starting the change.
We're not doing a blockade, Mara. We're not surrounding them. Maduro is still there. He's getting support from Russia, China, Cuba. How long do we think this standoff can last?
We don't know. I mean, despite what was written on John Bolton's notepad, we're also not sending troops there, it doesn't seem like. So the point is that even though he has Cuba, Russia, there are a lot of other countries that are lining up to support the opposition president, and that matters in Latin America and elsewhere.
Well, and we are doing a good job of applying pressure without getting fully involved. When we intervene in another country's affairs, it doesn't always work out the way we want. What we're doing in terms of imposing sanctions, working with other global leaders to encourage resolution to this humanitarian crisis is great, but stepping it up too much, we should make sure that's in our national interest as well.
I think Afghanistan, we first went in there, suitcases full of money as the big weapon, buying off the generals, buying allegiance. I think that is what is happening behind the scenes. I think 4 weeks from now, I think Maduro will be gone. I think that the tipping point is reached. The implosion there is obvious. The EU next week coming with sanctions, and the Russians do not have the money to be able to contest with us this far abroad.
You think a month?
Yeah.
All right, next up, 2020 and the abortion debate.
Governor Northam has clarified that in that conversation he wasn't talking about abortion. He was talking about circumstances where a woman may have a wanted pregnancy and then finds out later in life, in the pregnancy, that it won't be viable, it won't survive the womb.
What he was actually talking about was a little baby girl being born alive, and him saying, well, let's try to comfort the baby a little bit while the mom and the doctors have a debate, and whether a whole bunch of doctors get together and say, yeah, we think infanticide is okay. I think the 2020 Democratic presidential candidates should have to answer for this. This isn't the old Democratic Party argument 15 or 20 years ago that abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. This is about whether or not Democrats and these aggressive pro-abortion Democrats are going to continue to duck, talking about whether or not they stand with that little baby girl.
Well, it was tough to get Democratic senators on Capitol Hill to comment at all about this. Some of them said they didn't hear about it. Hard to believe that, but they did. And as far as the Planned Parenthood spokesperson, the governor of Virginia started the sentence with, when we talk about third trimester abortions. So clearly he was talking about abortion and that whole dynamic. National Review has a piece talking about Democrats running for president in 2020 haven't commented on the Virginia abortion bill, but most of them have effectively already told us where they stand because they have co-sponsored the Women's Health Protection Act, federal legislation that would override state restrictions on third trimester abortions. To that point, the bill's co-sponsors, who are already 2020 candidates, there you have them there, and possible 2020 contenders. There's a whole list of those as well who have not officially gotten into this race. But it's interesting to see, and it is definitely an issue that's getting attention. We're back with the panel. Molly.
Yes, this has been a very frustrating thing. As a Virginian, we are talking about this because Virginia was contemplating this late-term abortion bill. That is what Governor Northam was talking about. Although it is also true that people who have his radical views on abortion also oppose bills that would protect children who survive abortion. That is another issue that they are very much out of the mainstream and out of touch with even people who identify as pro-choice. It is very sad, actually, to hear some of these conversations that we're having. I mean, we are in a rare group of countries that even permit abortions at these latest stages of pregnancy when children can feel pain. We are with China and North Korea, countries that you don't want to be identified with, in permitting this barbaric and evil practice. It is also disappointing. I'm glad that you were trying to get senators on the record, because many people in the media do not ask people who have these radical views to explain themselves, to talk about what actually happens in these late-term abortion procedures or when a child survives abortion.
I mean, it's clearly something they don't want to talk about as you get into the details of this, Mara, but it's clearly also going to be an issue.
It's going to be an issue. I think politically this is called a self-own or a own goal, where you just really step in it. And the Democrats were on very safe political ground when safe, legal, and rare was the criteria. But this was a huge opening for Republicans, and you can see how aggressively they pounced on this because it sounded like he was defending infanticide. The president even was gloating about it, saying this is going to pump up the pro-life movement like nothing else has ever done that before. I don't know if that's true or not. I think it depends on how well Northam and others explain what they meant. But this was a huge political opening for
Well, it can't be like the
Republicans.
Planned Parenthood person,
No.
because he was talking about abortion and he was very detailed. And this bill is pretty detailed. The Women's Health Protection Act of 2017, restrictions on the performance of abortion are unlawful and shall not be imposed or applied by any government. Prohibition on abortion after fetal liability, one in the good faith medical judgment of the treating physician. Continuation of the pregnancy would pose a risk to the pregnant woman's life or health, is how that part reads. Tom.
This policy approach from Democrats makes much of social democratic Europe look like a citadel of old school firebrand American social conservatism, the distance in legal portfolio in terms of what is being suggested here. And I do think politically you can understand why President Trump is hitting this, because one of the critiques against the president is that he is someone who has a sort of flexible moral code. Well, if he is standing up on the platform saying, you know me for what I am, I've been here for 4 years, but Democrats are saying that you could essentially kill something that I think most Americans would say is alive at that point. Not only does that consolidate him as certainly the lesser of two evils in I think a lot of people's minds, but it suggests that there's a callousness to Democratic policies that does not fit with the moral narrative that they have so carefully sculpted with people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. That disconnect, I think, is their greatest challenge in a political sense.
Yeah, and it's, you know, obviously there's the pro-choice argument and the people who say, you know, that politicians should not be making decisions, but there always seemed, Mara and Molly, to be this line at which even those folks who were very advocating that didn't get to that point.
That's why it's important to even think about this in terms of people who are pro-choice would say that this type of legislation is extremely radical. Even people who identify as pro-choice tend to see abortion as something that should be done only in the first 3 months of the child's life. These bills are essentially Gosnell Protection Acts. Kermit Gosnell was the abortion doctor and serial murderer who's in prison in Pennsylvania
By the
for
way,
doing
we only
abortions.
covered that story and didn't get it covered for a lot of time before he ended up going to trial.
And these are the type of practices that I think everyone, regardless of whether they're pro-life and support the sanctity of human life for children or they're not, think this is extreme.
All right, panel, not done talking about this or the healthcare issue broadly. When we come back, giving is better than receiving. We'll explain. Tigers had a special surprise for one very important member of their football team.
I don't know if you're interested. I know you're busy, but the NFL, they have presented you with 2 Super Bowl tickets to the Super Bowl this year.
David Seville is the team's equipment manager and what many describe as really the heart of the Clemson football team. Seville also has Down syndrome, came to Clemson as part of a college program, and he was pretty psyched today. Looks like he might be a little late to classes on Monday. He's heading to the Super Bowl in Atlanta, and he phoned his father, That's good news. Thanks for inviting us into your home tonight. That's it for this special report. Fair, balanced, and unafraid. The story, hosted by New England's Patriots fan, Martha McCallum, starts right now.
Fired up. Thank you, Brett. All right, big show tonight, everybody, excluding my exclusive interview with President Trump's 2020 campaign manager, Brad Parscale. Stick around for that. Also, Congressman Trey Gowdy, who now has a new title that you will hear first here tonight. But first, the devastating polar vortex spreads its misery, as you have been watching. Bone-chilling temperatures out there. Midwest all the way to the Northeast. 15 deaths now blamed on the cold. This prompting Massachusetts Senator and presidential hopeful Elizabeth Warren to tweet this: "Our children and grandchildren should grow up in a world where they can breathe the air and drink the water and go outside without risking their lives in extreme temperatures." Hashtag Polar Vortex 2019. Warren is just one of many Democrats who are lining up between something called a Green New Deal, an economic overhaul that is aimed at fighting climate change. It's led by the newcomer Democratic Socialist Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and by Massachusetts Senator Ed Markey.
I do not think that for the future of humanity and for our country to continue to prosper, that we cannot have another presidential cycle where climate change is not being asked about at almost every debate. Of course, it would be amazing to see Green New Deal talked about, and it's starting to, and so that's really exciting.
So at this point, there are very few specifics on the actual plan, which is expected to roll out shortly, but there's plenty of support already among the highest profile members of the party.
I support a Green New Deal, and I will tell you why. Climate change is an existential threat to us, and we have got to deal with the reality of it.
We continue to ignore our planet. We will face dire consequences. We have a right to breathe clean air. I don't give a if it's the Republicans or the Democrats that are in control. You have a right to hold all of us accountable.
Those bleeps are becoming familiar from that individual. Joining me now, former Utah Congressman Jason Chaffetz, townhall.com editor Katie Pavlich. Both are Fox News contributors, and Austin Goolsbee, economics professor at the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business, previously served as President Obama's chief economist. So, rather than, I don't necessarily want to debate climate change, whether or not it is, scientifically real or to the extent that some people think it is. But in terms of the politics of this, Jason Chaffetz, let me start with you on this, because it is clearly, like healthcare, going to be a central part of the Democratic side of the equation. Is that wise? And do you expect that it will be dealt with in a way that resonates with voters?
Well, I think everybody cares about what they throw into the air and in the water, but the Democrats' approach to this has been by force. They spent nearly $800 billion on this stimulus package, and they poured billions of dollars into companies that with no end result. They've put forward a cap and trade. They did all of these other things where they tried to force it. So when I see Green Deal, I know that means a whole lot of greenbacks, because it's going to be very, very costly what they're forcing people to do.
When you look back, Austin, at the Obama administration, and there was a big push for this, that we should basically, that it's almost it was an economic stimulus program to be coming up with lots of companies who could do things in a greener way and new forms of energy. And, one of those, and some of it, was a good idea, obviously. Some of it wasn't. This obviously is the Solyndra moment that everybody remembers from that era. Watch this.
And we can see the positive impacts right here at Solyndra. Less than a year ago, we were standing on what was an empty lot. But through the Recovery Act, this company received a loan to expand its operations.
So, obviously, Austin, that loan, the company went bankrupt. But overall, is this good economics for the government to get involved in the business of a Green New Deal?
Well, it depends what a Green New Deal is, obviously. One of the biggest advocates of our involvement are the generals at the Pentagon, who say that the changing of the climate is one of the biggest national security threats to the U.S. military. both to our bases, which may be damaged as the seawater rises, as well as the displacement of peoples and the extreme weather events that we experience in the United States. Now, we have seen over the last 10 years, much of which came out of that stimulus, a big rise of wind power, a big rise of solar, and I think the more extreme weather events take place, the more on the minds of the American voters it is. So if you look in polls, people are really quite surprisingly concerned about these issues of climate change. And when they have big hurricanes and they have big weather events, that makes them more prone to be angry at the dismantling of EPA.
You know, the question, the new UN panel finds there's no observable increase in hurricane frequency. Likewise, extreme weather is killing fewer people now than at any point in the last 100 years. Extreme weather killed about 500,000 people annually back in the 20s. Now, despite being 4 times as many people, it kills fewer than 20,000. And of course, you know, you'd like to see that number be 0. But Katie, just in terms of the realistic picture here and what this kind of deal would mean.
Well, look, they call it a Green New Deal, but this is really just a massive redistribution and confiscation of wealth by socialists who say that's exactly what they want to do. I'm not sure how they're going to pay for any kind of Green New Deal after they get through Medicare for All and have to confiscate all of the wealth from billionaires in this country to pay for that alone and then increase taxes on the middle class. There is an argument to be made, of course, about how you can clean up the environment further. The United States is the most responsible country in the world when it comes to adhering to our own policies and principles about the environment. We got out of the Climate Paris Accord. We're still complying with some of the emissions standards of that accord, and yet a number of the countries who are still bound by it, who haven't left the deal, are not complying. And so when you look at the policies that environmentalists have pushed over the last 10 years when it comes to flooding these organizations or these companies like Solyndra with taxpayer money because they can't stand up and produce on their own merit, unlike fossil fuel companies, you have to ask what the return on investment is and whether it actually does do anything to clean up the environment. As we've seen, the cost has been very, very high in terms of what they want to do.
Jason, what's your thought on that?
No, I agree with Katie. Absolutely. They're taking away straws. That's not going to solve the problem. I want to be able to get a plastic straw when I go to McDonald's and order a drink. And what the Democrats are trying to do is force this on the American people, but they ignore some of the greenest things that are out there. You can't have a discussion in this country about electricity, for instance, without talking about nuclear. But you can't build a nuclear plant in this country because of all the environmental regulations that are out there. So they've got to get real on this stuff. They said they're going to put root beer in all the drinking fountains. Everything's going to be great. But you can't figure out the economics of it, and they want to force people to do things that the American people don't want to do, and that's why they overstep, and they're having such a hard time selling this.
Do you think it's a mistake, Austin, that some of these candidates have already jumped on this phrase, the new Green Deal, before it's even been rolled out, before they even know exactly what the plan is by the Congresswoman and the Senator?
That's probably a risk, because if you say, yes, I'm for it, and then you find out there's something in it that people don't like, that would be a risk. But look, I'm telling you, when you see the EPA changing the rules so that power plants can dump more mercury into our drinking water, when they're changing various environmental regulations that are deeply unpopular when they're doing it, anybody who gets on the wrong side of that issue, I think the voters are going to hold them accountable. So we should, to agree with some of the aspects of what the previous speaker said, we should be mindful of doing things in an economically strategic way, but we need to, for both national security grounds and on public safety grounds, keep our eye on the environment and do everything we can to improve that.
All right. Thank you all. Great to see you tonight.
Thanks, Martha.
So coming up next, an exclusive with the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Alex Azar, speaking out for the first time on President Trump's plan to lower your prescription drug prices in a meaningful way as these new costs come out in January. Plus, the untold story of Brad Parscale, his ascension from small-town boy in Kansas, not involved in politics, to now running the Trump campaign in 2020.
Being a campaign manager has kind of adapted for some campaigns into being the spokesperson and a comms director. That's not what I'm trying to be. I'm trying to be a guy that's actually the CEO of this organization.
Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm a man of wealth and taste. Pleased to meet you. Hope you guess my name. Come on, come on.
We're all saying, oh, let's do this, but we're not giving one dime for the wall. That's okay. But if they're not going to give money for the wall, it's not going to work. And if it's not going to work, then the politicians are really wasting a lot of time.
President Trump today, as the bipartisan commission tries to strike a deal to keep the government from shutting down again. And meanwhile, the drugs keep coming across the southern border.
We're allowing people to come into this country and sell drugs and human traffic and do all of these horrible things that if we had the simplicity of a well-constructed, beautiful barrier or wall, they wouldn't be able to come into our country.
Border crossings down, 90% of the drugs coming through the legal ports of entry.
We're talking about drugs. The vast majority comes in at ports of entry, not between the ports of entry, not anywhere that a wall would be.
Absolutely true, but that doesn't mean it's not a problem. In fact, tonight we can report the biggest bust ever of fentanyl, which killed about 18,000 Americans last year and was blamed in the death of music star Prince. A produce truck came across the border from Mexico, and on the second round, in a secret compartment, they found this, 254 pounds of deadly synthetic opioid, street value $3.5 million, estimated to be enough to kill 57 million people, because it takes that tiny an amount in some cases for some people to be killed by this substance. So the truck, as I said, was undergoing a secondary scan. Dogs picked up the scent. The rear floor of this tractor trailer, as it came through one of these ports of entry, was ripped up. They found more drugs on the Mexican driver in the forms of bags of pills. So joining me now on that and other big news tonight in the prescription drug arena, Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar. Secretary Azar, thank you very much for being here tonight. This is precisely the kind of thing that the president talks about when you look at the drug trade that does come across at these ports of entry.
You bet, Martha, and I am very grateful to our colleagues in the Border Patrol for their efforts that led to this historic interdiction. I'm also grateful to President Trump for fighting for border security and for fighting to reverse this horrible opioid crisis. You know, this fentanyl, that's a historic amount of fentanyl. Think of how many Americans could be killed by that. Fentanyl's already killing so many Americans every single day as part of this opioid crisis.
What do you say to those who, we played a little bit of it in the intro, who say, it's not a border wall that is needed. It's these drugs come through the port of entry, so that wouldn't have any impact on that.
Well, drugs come through everywhere, just like people do. You need border security. You can't just declare that here's the one place to bring your illegal drugs across. We need border security, and that's what President Trump is fighting for.
All right. Tell me about the big change that came. The president and you have worked on the issue of rising drug prices in this country and these crazy questions of why people end up paying more and more every single year when January comes. What did you do today, and what's the impact on regular Americans?
Well, Martha, I'm going to let you in on a little secret, as well as your viewers. When you show up at the pharmacy to buy a drug that has a price of $300 and you're paying $300 or 1% of that $300, there's somebody in the background called a pharmacy benefit manager or a middleman, and they're getting a kickback from the drug company based on your purchase, and that might be $60, $80, or $100. And what President Trump is proposing tonight is that you, the patient, should get that discount when you buy the drug at the pharmacy. So you save that money, not the middlemen.
How's he going to achieve that? I mean, won't they just find another way to move that money around so that they're still benefiting from it?
No. See, what we're doing is we're proposing to change the rules of the road that say right now, you can, as a drug company, give these kickbacks to these pharmacy benefit managers, and we would, under this proposal, outlaw that. And instead, you would have to provide those discounts to the patient when the patient shows up at the pharmacy. So you, the patient, get these savings. So think about how many drugs that you're buying now in January after your deductible reset in the calendar year, the issue you just talked about, Martha. You show up and you're bearing the full cost of that drug. Well, someone in the back, they're getting a discount on that. You're not getting it. You're paying full price. Next year, January 1st, under this proposal, you would get that discount. You wouldn't pay as much out of pocket when you walk in the pharmacy.
And you know, the proof of that may be in the fact that CVS and Cigna shares both tumbled on the news of this because they benefit from these pharmacy management programs. Just a quick question before I let you go. Kamala Harris wants to do away with all the insurance companies. Would that have any impact on this?
Well, you know,
And
I'll
do you
just
think
say
that's a good
as
idea?
a general matter, these ideas of Medicare for all will threaten to undermine those of our senior citizens on Medicare, the sacred promise that we have to them and their program, as well as to really undermine or even take away the private insurance that over 140 million Americans have through their employer and they're quite happy with. You know, when they came up with Obamacare, they falsely promised that if you liked your insurance, you could keep it. Nobody's even making that promise with these Medicare for all slogans.
Secretary Azar, thank you very much. Good to have you on the story tonight. So do you remember this?
We're going to end the government corruption, and we're going to drain the swamp in Washington, D.C.
Sure you do. And our exclusive Untold story with Trump's 2020 campaign manager, who says the president is delivering on that message for voters.
I think this president's not anything wrong other than actually try to fight a system that was broken and that was a swamp. And I think when you're the shark in the swamp, all the other animals in the swamp want to kill you.
Dealing with psoriatic arthritis pain was so frustrating.
My skin
y al grupo de extremistas que lo rodea, John Bolton, Mike Pompeo, a la CIA, a Mike Pence, no permitirle al grupo de extremistas imponer sus mentiras sobre Venezuela.
Yeah, those are the people to blame. That is the message that the Venezuelan people are seeing from their President Maduro, as the government blocks any coverage, really, of the opposition leader, Juan Guaido, who claims tonight that Maduro's national police showed up at his home to intimidate him and his family. His 20-month-old daughter was there. His grandmother was at home. He is warning them, saying, do not cross the red line when it comes to my family. Here he is earlier this week.
Yes, they have threatened my physical integrity, my family's, and unfortunately, I'm not the only one. There's over 300 political prisoners.
Maduro's police have already arrested or expelled 13 journalists from the country by our latest count tonight, as the situation could easily go either way here. The United States has a lot at stake, and Maduro is backed by Russia and by China, who also have a lot at stake in this. Joining me now, Wall Street Journal columnist Mary O'Grady. Mary, good to see you tonight. Where do you think this stands right now?
Well, I think actually that the opposition is in good shape, which is not to say it's over, but having been recognized by scores of governments around the world, the international community is really strongly with the opposition, and that's because the photos, the evidence, I mean, it's so stacked against this dictatorship. Really, the only ones that are backing him are some Democrats in the U.S. and China, Hezbollah, Russia, Cuba, Iran, you know, that small sort of axis of evil, but most of the world is supporting him. And the other thing that's good that's happening is this financial squeeze that is going to hit him. The Bank of England refused to send $1.2 billion in gold reserves to Maduro when he asked for it last week. The U.S. government has said that they can send all the oil they want from the state-owned oil company, but the payments for that oil will go into an escrow account, which will be used by the new government to help the Venezuelan people. And that's really where the rubber will hit the road, because when he no longer has the money to pay his military, they're going to start to feel that their interests are not in a good place in sticking with him. And I think that's where he might end up saying, you know, I'm better off if I retire on a beach in Cuba.
Possibly. You know, obviously he's tried very hard to hang on to power. He hasn't cared, you know, a lick about the Venezuelan people. They don't have any medicine, toilet paper, electricity, as you say. I mean, they've already been through hell, and they're hoping that there is some way out of this. But, you know, I think about the days that continue, where we heard, oh, Assad's days are numbered. Assad is about to leave. And it's interesting when you have the support of places like Russia that sometimes these people are able to hang on.
Well, I don't think Russia has really the capability to do anything big there. They have the capability to kind of launch a kind of asymmetric war. Cuba is the one that really has the interest. And, you know, you say that he's hanging on. Cuba's telling him to hang on. He doesn't run Venezuela. Raul Castro runs Venezuela. And Cuba, to give up Venezuela would be an ideological loss, because they use that real estate in South America to push their ideology all over the continent, but also because of the oil reserves that they've been so dependent on. I have said from the beginning, the Cubans are not going to just put down their guns and walk out. You know, it's going to be a fight. And what I'm really worried about is not so much that Maduro will hang on, but then in the aftermath, you're going to have a lot of irregular groups and maybe, like I said, this kind of asymmetric fighting, and you could even have kind of a civil war type of an environment, which of course is the kind of thing the Russians would really like to see. They can't succeed at anything, but they love to ruin other people's lives.
We'll see. Mary, thank you very much. Good to see you tonight. Mary O'Grady from the Wall Street Journal. Coming up, Trey Gowdy with a big announcement that you will hear only on The Story. Plus, we are on the brink, perhaps, of Roe versus Wade, an insurgence over this discussion here in America as we head into 2020, after Virginia becomes the latest state to propose sweeping changes to late-term abortion.
She has physical signs that she is about to give a birth. Would that still be a point at which she could request an abortion if she was so certified?
My bill would allow that, yes.
I can tell you exactly what would happen. The infant would be delivered, the infant would be kept comfortable, and then a discussion would ensue between the physicians and the mother.
That was Virginia governor in a comment that has him facing a firestorm. And today, Virginia lawmaker Kathy Tran tried to clarify the bill that she was fighting for in Virginia after she got some fierce backlash. Watch this.
Right now, women are able to access an abortion in the later stages of pregnancy under certain conditions with the approval of medical doctors. I've done nothing to change that.
Today, Speaker Nancy Pelosi was asked about all this.
Considering the comments from Governor Northam yesterday, how does that make it harder for pro-life Democrats in the party, and does that cause problems at all?
I'm sorry, I just don't know what he said yesterday.
But are there pro-life Democrats left in the party? Remember, Democrats used to say this.
We can support a woman's right to choose that makes abortion safe, legal, and rare, and reduces the number of abortions.
In 2017, DNC Chair Tom Perez said this in a statement. Every Democrat, like every American, should support a woman's right to make choices about her own body and her health. That is not negotiable, he said. New York, Virginia, Louisiana, Rhode Island now are all debating easier access to third-term abortions in their states. So what is going on here? Perhaps this, a Supreme Court that now leans solidly right, may be firing up liberal states who want to push the existing law as far as they can. Here now, Margot Cleveland, a senior contributor to The Federalist. Margot, good to have you with us tonight. Thanks for being here. You know, this question about whether or not Democrats, whether they are accepting of Democrats who are pro-life anymore, as Hillary Clinton was, you know, clearly much more inclusive on this issue.
Right, and I don't think you see that. You see that the Democrat Party is going extreme from not pro-choice but pro-abortion. You're seeing it with these extreme bills in Virginia and New York, which they were cheering.
So, you know, in terms of that, what do you think is the motivating factor? Is it the fact that the court is now leaning more right? Is that what is sort of firing up the legislative actions in these states?
I think they're using that as an excuse, and that it gives them an opportunity to push the legislators that they are supporting. I don't think that Roe v. Wade has anything to do with what their view is, because it doesn't prohibit this now, and if it was overturned, it wouldn't prohibit it. So I think what you're seeing is that they're using this as an excuse to push as extreme abortion measures as they can.
I think a lot of people, you know, watch this debate and they're kind of shocked, no matter what, whether they're pro-choice or pro-life. I mean, clearly if they're pro-life, they're shocked. I think some pro-choice people are also kind of shocked when they hear the reality of some of these procedures and the concept that a baby could be born alive and then a decision would be made about whether or not the doctor and the parent would allow it to continue living. I remember Kamala Harris the other day asking, what kind of country do we want to be? And that, you know, that's where this whole thing comes back to. I want to show you this moment that was with congressional testimony. It was tweeted the other day by Ashton Kutcher, the actor. It's from about a year and a half ago, I believe. Let's watch this.
I am a man. See me as a human being, not a birth defect, not a syndrome. I don't need to be eradicated. I don't need to be cured.
That was not from this Frank Peters, not from the congressional testimony, but from another really powerful statement that he made that I think really makes a lot of people think.
Absolutely, and I think that one thing that's very helpful in this debate is to understand this really hasn't changed. As the representative said in clarifying, New York law already allows that. It's just that they were changing some of the parameters of how many doctors had to certify mental health. And that is what is horrifying for Americans to discover, that you can have up to the point of birth an abortion that will kill the fetus, even though the fetus is viable, and completely healthy if a doctor will say it's in the best interest of the mental health of the mother. And that is allowed currently. So she was just making it easier, not changing the substance of the law.
Yeah, I mean, it appears that there has been pushback that some of these procedures, you know, were not easy enough to come by, and that people were denied them for reasons that they thought were not fair, and that has sparked this push to make it easier. And we saw the big applause in the New York State Assembly and the pink lights on the Freedom Tower celebrating that now it would be easier. Margot, thank you very much. Good to have you with us tonight.
Thanks.
Coming up next, Trey Gowdy on reports that Nellie Ohr was digging for dirt when she was working on opposition research on President Trump's wife and on his children. Also, the untold story of Brad Parscale, President Trump's 2020 campaign manager, on his boss.
He's already wealthy. He was already famous. He already had power. He's doing this for this country. That's why I stick with him every day.
We understand the anxiety that comes with picking a two.
There is a news story out there tonight on the Senate's investigation about the mysterious phone calls that were made by Donald Trump Jr. ahead of the infamous Trump Tower meeting. Now, you may remember from the reporting on this that some congressional investigators wanted to know who a blocked phone number was and whether or not he had made a call to his father before that big meeting, then candidate Donald Trump.
Shortly after arranging the meeting, Don Jr. made an 11-minute phone call to a blocked number. Asked if he remembers who that call was with, Trump Jr. said, "I don't."
There were questions about a phone call he made to a blocked number, and it has been pointed out that his father has a blocked number.
It would be hard to believe that Don Jr. didn't mention it to his father.
It's counterintuitive to think he didn't tell his father.
Well, and the real question is whether or not he did, right? He has said that he didn't. Now, we've got this ABC News report that is coming out tonight that cites investigators on the Senate Intel panel who say that those blocked phone calls were not between Donald Trump Jr. and his father. They were actually calls that were made to two friends and business associates, according to the early reporting on this. Here now on this and other things tonight, Trey Gowdy, former South Carolina Republican congressman and House Oversight Committee chairman, now a partner at Nelson Mullins law firm in South Carolina. And tonight, he makes his debut as a Fox News contributor. And we hope that we're going to see him on a weekly basis here on the story. So good to see you tonight, Trey Gowdy. Thank you very much and congratulations. Welcome.
Yes,
welcome to the family.
Thank you. Thank you for the job.
Absolutely. It's great to have you here. First of all, your reaction to this, because it strikes me, and we're still learning about this story. As I mentioned, it's an ABC report that I just cited. But what it strikes me is that you see all of the sort of hyperbole and all the guessing about what it was before anybody knows what it is, and we've seen a heck of a lot of that.
It's the biggest distinction between what I call serious investigations and political investigations where you speculate rampantly. The first thing I wanted to do was call Richard Burr, who's the chairman of the Senate Intel Committee, and thank him for running a serious investigation where they actually figure out the facts before they make allegations, because sometimes some folks do it in the reverse order. They make these wild allegations, and all of your viewers may not be around to see the truth. They heard the accusation, but they may miss the truth, and that's why you don't do that in serious investigations.
I think one of those people that you're referring to is Adam Schiff, who you've been very critical of in this whole process, saying that he made up his mind before he saw any of the evidence. Is that true? Is that your feeling on it?
Well, I'm just quoting him. He had evidence that rises above the level of circumstantial evidence, but not quite direct. And, of course, there is no such thing, that President Trump colluded with Russia. I think Adam also said there's a very real chance Donald Trump is going to be indicted and or arrested the day he leaves office. Adam uniquely was both a federal prosecutor and now he's a member of Congress. I like the Adam Schiff, who was a federal prosecutor, better, where you actually are presumed innocent and you have to go in a courtroom and prove these things as opposed to just speculating and accusing people.
I also want to ask you about this Nellie Orr story that she was investigating when she worked for Fusion GPS. She was doing opposition research, and campaigns do this stuff. They look into the family members. They try to see if they can dig up any dirt. And they looked into Melania Trump. They looked into the Trump children as well. But what you say is that you've never seen in a federal investigation the kind of circle that also involved her husband, Bruce Orr, who was at the Department of Justice, which was, of course, investigating the Trump campaign.
It's the strangest fact pattern I think I've ever seen. You have a private entity in Fusion GPS, and they're working with Chris Steele, who was an FBI source, but then was terminated for violating his FBI agreement. And you are kind of laundering this information, this private information, to the world's premier law enforcement agency and to the Department of Justice, and you're using a DOJ official as the conduit of that information. So it's really surprising. I would think in a different political environment, everyone would be outraged because you are running the risk of privatizing crime. If you can hire a group to dig up information and then use a DOJ official who gets his information from a terminated FBI source and it still winds up in the hands of the federal government, that should alarm all of us, and I hope that we get back to a time in our lives where it is alarming to everyone.
Very interesting. Last thought, Roger Stone, there's a lot of discussion about the raid at his house and whether or not it was disproportionate to what they are looking for from him. They said today they got terabytes, which I guess is tons and tons of information from his house, and, you know, perhaps to sort of shore up the notion that this was all necessary. What do you think?
I want to make sure I don't do the very thing that I started off your show by being upset that others do, which is speculate. I think they should bring in Chris Wray. Chris is a Trump appointee. He was a federal prosecutor. He's a serious guy, whether you like President Trump or not. Chris Wray is a serious guy. Bring him in and ask him why the Bureau thought that amount of force was necessary, whether or not they were going to execute a search warrant while they were there, if they had any evidence that Roger Stone might be a flight risk. Ask Chris Wray. It is not Bob Mueller's fault. The prosecutor does not decide what weaponry to use when you effectuate an arrest. The FBI does. So bring him in and ask him.
Yeah, and they use what they think they need. So we'll see. Trey Gowdy, great to have you with us, and welcome to the family.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll
Yes,
see
ma'am.
you soon. All right, coming up next, the untold story of Brad Parscale, the conductor of the Trump train.
I've also done a good job of not trying to be a train on the train track instead of being a conductor of the Trump train. Someone had to be the one to make sure it gets there on time and make sure all the pieces stay together, and I chose that role.
Liberty Mutual.
Designer in a little bookstore in Kansas. In short order, he became candidate Trump's digital wizard in the 2016 campaign. Now he's in charge of 2020. This is his untold story of Brad Parscale.
Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good, as my father always said. I started off in a bookstore learning how to become a web designer, a web marketer, almost 20 years ago. And I got lucky that my first customer ended up knowing a guy who knew a girl, and then eventually that person knew somebody, and I got a phone call one day, and that person gave me a chance to bid on a project for the Trumps, and I've spent the last decade nearly working my way up in that family. And when the blessing came to be
You think they want to kill him?
Yeah, they want to get him. They want him gone. They want him gone. He's defeating a system that was broken for multiple decades. He's fighting back. He needs nothing from it. He's already wealthy. He was already famous. He already had power. He's doing this. He's doing this for this country. That's why I stick with him every day.
What do you think people don't get about President Trump, who you've worked with and know
That he's selfless.
personally?
He's selfless. I really truly believe it. I know him better than almost anyone. He actually really cares about everybody.
But the tweeting and all of that, he talks about himself a lot. He talks about, running having the greatest campaign win in history. So I think a lot of people have a very different impression of him than that, and maybe that's partly his own fault.
No. I think the fake news media, when they actually figured out that he was going to change the status quo from them having power and be able to dictate how the U.S. government and the way they felt about what their job was, felt like they had to fight back against him because they were part of that infrastructure that was broken. The president felt like he had to fight back against it. And I think Twitter finally gave him the tool to do so. They couldn't convert his message. They couldn't change it. They couldn't know how to adapt. So you see when he started tweeting and doing those things, they didn't know what to do, and they started running in circles. And that's because finally a president didn't need them. He could talk directly to the people. It's the reason why I don't talk to much media and I don't trust them, because most of them have an agenda, and they have an agenda that I clearly see, and I'm glad that every day he fights against it.
You feel like you have his 100% confidence?
I believe so. I mean, I think I've proven that. Look, he does things. He always makes his own choice, but am I a person that he listens to? Of course. Does he listen to the data? Yes. He's a very highly intelligent man.
Did you ever imagine growing up as a little boy, I was going to say, or a very tall boy in Kansas, that you would one day be working for the President of the United States?
No, never. I just wanted to have a family and have a good job and come from a lot. So, my expectations were not, to be sitting here with you.
How has it changed you?
It's a humbling experience. You know, the first day you're called every name in the book just because you chose a side is a humbling experience.
Brad Parscale, thank you. Always good to talk to you. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks.
Don't forget to subscribe to the Untold Story podcast on foxnewspodcast.com or wherever you listen. Brad Parscale's full interview will be posted there on Monday morning. I encourage you to listen to that. We're going to be back here tomorrow night. As always, we'll see you at 7 o'clock. Tucker Carlson's warming up to get going in D.C. Have a good night.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. We don't do a lot of weather segments on the show, but we couldn't help but notice this phenomenon called a polar vortex that's descended on the Midwestern United States this week. Temperatures dropped to lows that didn't even seem real. Parts of the state of Illinois fell to 38 degrees below zero this morning. That's a new state record. In Thief River Falls, Minnesota, the temperature approached 80 below. Ugh. Cold like that will turn hot coffee to ice crystals before it hits the ground. Stay outside for any length of time and you will die. And a number of people did in that region. They were found froze to death in the last few days. Meteorologists, and this is the good news, say it will warm up soon. Climate change will continue as it always has. Spring will come. But this is a good reminder of something. Energy matters. It keeps us